Welcome everyone. Excited to have you here today. My name is Alex Strost, and I'm going to lead us through a discussion for ACG's feature session on DEI's impact in the middle market. I get the honor of introducing our panelists today. These experts are going to help lay the foundation for better understanding DEI and offer some key strategies in how to successfully implement an effective DEI program. David Babula is an associate partner with McKinsey & Company and is a co-leader for diversity, equity, and inclusion for McKinsey's private markets clients globally. They have led a series of multi-phase DEI programs for PE firms. Tanisha Wicker, Senior Vice President in Human Resources at Smile Brands. Tanisha is an undeniably dynamic force and a leader widely recognized and respected by her peers for pioneering lasting transformation in human resources. And Tanya Wong is Vice President at Houlihan Lokey. Alongside her primary responsibility as an investment banker, Tanya serves on Houlihan Lokey's internal DEI committee and is a leader in the Urban Land Institute's DEI committee in New York. These panelists have done exemplary work in establishing and promoting DEI initiatives in their organizations and across industries. So we're going to spend the next 50 minutes diving into a conversation, and we're going to save the last 10 minutes or so for some Q&A. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So, David, I want to lead off with you in asking to maybe lay the foundation for what is DE&I. We hear it all the time, we talk about it, but what does it really mean?
Well, first off, thank you for those of you who are joining the session. Hopefully, you'll be able to glean just a little bit from our session and take it back to your organizations. In terms of the question, DE&I. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is, looking across the room, looking across your organization, what I like to call bean counting, right? How many women do you have? How many males do you have? How many black individuals do you have? Latinx, LGBTQ+, those that come from lower socioeconomic status versus higher. It is representation, right? Who is a part of your organization and the organizations that your company touches. So that's sort of the first one. Equity, candidly, is really complicated, and where we are in our DEI journey globally, we're not yet there, but for the sake of definition, it is effectively the policies, the programs that all of you institute at your organizations to ensure that any part of my identity, their identity, doesn't hold back opportunities, progress, promotion, success. And then inclusion is effectively, if I can, as a biracial, genderqueer, gay person, be able to bring my true authentic self to work each and every day. It is how I feel with my colleagues, with my teammates, with senior leaders, with clients. So yeah, that's the definition. Hopefully, now that we're all grounded, we can have a cool conversation. But I think it's always helpful to ensure that we're speaking the same language.
So, Tina, I want to go to you just for a quick moment. When we were prepping before this, you talked about where DE&I kind of work together. Can you share a little your thoughts around that?
Sure. I think this conversation has been going on in earnest for 25 years. But 25 years ago, we were talking about diversity, right? Racial diversity, ethnicity, gender. About 10 years ago, we added inclusion. It was diversity and inclusion. You can't have diversity without inclusion. And now more recently, over the last couple of years, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that the evolution of the way we talk about it speaks to the evolution of what this concept is. Diversity is not a destination. You don't arrive at being diverse. It is part of the fabric and the culture of your company that continues to evolve. So once you have diversity, once you get people through the door, and you then create an inclusive environment, which then perpetuates your diversity, you can then create systems that are equitable so that people really are rewarded on the basis of their own merits as opposed to any other extrinsic or intrinsic factors.
Alex, I would say a secret to success, I'm I'm at a company and one of our sponsors, or our sponsor, our PE sponsor, asked me to participate. But what I will tell you, given our experience, one of the secrets to success is going to come through inclusion. If you have inclusivity and a sense of belonging within your organizations, your recruitment marketing will reflect that. The behaviors within your culture will reflect that. And we're able to attract talent because we focus so heavily on inclusion. So when people show up for, as a candidate for an interview, that's one of the things that we are regarded for and complimented on, is that I see myself here. And when they get there, our say-do ratio matches. So what we say outwardly, we actually do internally. So the commitments that we profess externally, we then execute that internally. So as you are looking to grow your pipeline of talent, inclusivity and inclusion is what's going to help you get there. I would say that's probably 80% of the battle, especially now in the times in which we live. And talent, as we know, the market is very hot. So people have opportunities and they've got options. And so if they're looking through their options, you want to be the standout. And the way to do that is to articulate a message along with your commitment around inclusion.
So I want to play that back for a minute and really summarize. I think the theme of this is diversity is the easy part that we all kind of understand what it means. It's really understanding the importance behind equity and inclusion, and those two really go hand in hand with ensuring that diversity is truly a success, and it's not check the box item. It's not just something we're doing. Now, all of that said, now that we have a clear understanding of what DE&I means through this conversation, I'd like to dive into a little bit of the business case. Why does this matter? Why should we actually care about that? And David, can I start with you on that?
Sure. I'm sitting up because this is the part that my clients get super excited about, because it involves numbers and proving that like it impacts your dollars, which I know all of you think about dollars all the time, given the industry and the conference. So for those of you that have heard me speak about this, I've been speaking about the business case for change for the last couple of years. And in 2014, McKinsey did this massive study. We took a bunch of companies globally, and we looked at what representation looked like at their executive teams. And we reran that study in 2017 and then reran that study in 2019. To no surprise to any of us, the story still stuck. And basically what we found was, when we broke down the quartiles, top quartile diversity companies, so these are executive teams boards, were financially outperforming from an EBIT margin perspective bottom quartile companies by 25% when they were in the top quartile for gender diversity, so more women on their executive teams. And then we ran that same analysis for ethnicity and race. It was 36% higher financial outperformance than those in the bottom quartile. And that's awesome, right? Diverse teams lead to higher financial outperformance. There's a couple of things that come with that, though. Over the last couple of years, we've heard a lot about certain states, certain organizations putting quotas in place, right? We need at least one woman. We need at least one BIPOC individual, BIPOC representing people of color. And so we ran another analysis, which basically said, okay, cool. Across the UK and the US, we took a bunch of companies again, and we looked at the growth in financial outperformance when they grew their executive teams with women. And what we saw was companies that went from 0 to 10% to somewhere in the middle, right? Roughly 30%. They did financially outperform those in the bottom quartile. But those that went from 0 to 10% of women on their executive team to more than 30% outperformed by close to 50%. And so to all of my clients that were like, hey, we need to get at least one person, homeboy, you want to get more than at least one person. 50% financial outperformance when we went from 0 to 10 to more than 30%. And the story doesn't end there. I have some more numbers. Because what we wanted to do is we wanted to go to those individuals, and we wanted to talk about the polarization, right? There's a penalty for not doing this. And so what we found was those that lacked the initiative to ensure diversity and representation was on their executive team, and so we put them in the bottom quartile. They were underperforming by 19% in terms of EBIT margin. So it's not just you need to prioritize getting folks on the team. If you're sitting there and doing nothing, you're already losing dollars. Hopefully that has intrigued many of you. But that is the business case.
So, and I want to ask a slight follow-up on this. You may not have the exact answer, and feel free to chime in if anyone has a thought on this. Why is that? What's driving that?
How much time do we have?
38 minutes.
And I don't want to steal the mic, but I think there have been so many studies that have basically articulated when you want to serve a customer, right? And let's just take, B2C, right? If you want to serve a customer, if you have a room full of very qualified straight white cis men, they will likely appeal to straight white cis men. But if you decide that, hey, we're going to add a black woman, we're going to add a queer, biracial person, we're going to add an Asian X, we're going to add a Latinx, the number of people that you're going to be able to serve with proper product market fit increases by so much. And so I think that's just one anecdotal example of why everything that I just articulated just makes sense.
Yeah, the other thing I would mention is that, we've long been studying the ROI case for being diverse, equitable, and inclusive, but we're getting to a point where it's not going to be much of a choice. It's going to go from being neutral to positive to being negative if you're not. And that's because the SEC is looking at more strict disclosures as it relates to ESG. They already published the E last month. LPs, if you touch a pension fund in any way, the first question they ask you is, how are you addressing E, S, and G? And diversity being a big part of S. And then from a recruiting standpoint, the generation that's coming up into the workforce that is going to drive your growth, it has a mindset shift, and they do care about this stuff. It is about culture. It is about being able to bring your authentic self to work. And so all of these things are going to start hitting those of us who have not been intentional about diversity in a negative way, on top of everything that David has just talked about.
Tanisha, can I go to you for a second on this? You work in an HR function, and I'm sure that DE&I is a component of where you spend your time. Where have you seen this back up some of the data that David's sharing?
I would say for us, as I said, we're committed and we're pronounced about how we show representation within our organization. So it's not uncommon to check social media or even our internal channels where you'll see LGBTQ plus individuals and African Americans and Latinx and South Asian and Asian. We want to, and even those that have religious beliefs, we celebrate all of those things. And so for us, when we are going through our recruitment marketing, we are providing materials that represent the communities that we serve. So for us, it's twofold. We've seen a benefit and an increase on our patient side because we have teams that represent the patients that we serve. And we've seen an increase in our applicant flow because people see themselves in our environment. And so it makes it easier, and even my own personal experience, showing up on our website, it's not uncommon for me to receive an email or voicemail of a woman or a black female to say, I applied because I saw you, and I'm hoping that this works out for the best. So those individuals end up being qualified and they are able to perform, and we're able to see the benefit of that, not only in the performance of an individual practice or a market, but it helps us become better for our communities that we serve.
And just piling on what both of you have just said, when we look at the workforce today, young people in the workforce, so likely the ones sitting in your analyst and associate classes, likely sitting at your entry-level positions in most cases, they're 2 times more likely to call you out for not being inclusive in your workforce. And then when it comes to just the number of applications that have increased, what we found was individuals that perceived equality and fairness in things like promotion cycles, in interview tactics, in evaluations throughout the years, are 3 times more likely to stay at your organization, and they're also 3 times more likely to recommend your organization to their peers, to folks at different companies, to their friends. And so it codifies the reason why, like, this war on talent, like what DEI can actually do to help your organization win it.
I would say it is a war on talent. And for us, between, when you say BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, LGBTQ members, we were able to see that on average, our tenure among those groups is about 8 years. So we do hold on, and I've been with the company for 17 years, we do hold on to this immense talent that we have access to. And they're not, one, I think there's an illumination of pride that they have, that they're working with and for a company that supports them being their authentic self. And then you've also got this sense of overall belonging, that we're going to celebrate the differences and the shared experiences, and some not so shared experiences, but they're willing to tell their friends about us. And typically, talent will run in packs, right? When you've got a lot of smart people, those smart people are typically running with smart people, and they're not dealing with dodo birds, right? So you have people that are smart dealing with other smart individuals, and that opens up, I think, cast a wider net for us as well.
So again, to summarize a little of what I heard is it's 2 sides. It's internally for the company, for the organization. This is an opportunity to attract and retain better talent. And ultimately, by doing that, by building that better talent, you also are having some level of better decision making when it comes to addressing your actual market from an external side. So it's not just the revenue opportunities, but it's also the finding and having the right people as part of the organization. So now we know what DEI means. We know the business case. We see there's value in it. How do we make this happen? What do we need to do as an organization to really be successful? Tanya, can I start with you on that?
Sure. Ultimately, it's intentionality, right? I think we need to be thoughtful. First and foremost, we need to be unafraid of the data and taking a look at disaggregated data, looking at your classes, your different levels, your different dimensions of diversity, which, there's so many different dimensions of, human experience, whether it's socioeconomic, being a vet, gender, ethnicity, all of the above. And I think it's understanding how and where you want to be diverse and putting plans in place with intention. And then being patient. We're very good as an industry of wanting overnight results, faster process, momentum, that sort of thing. And the reality is a lot of these things are going to take time. They may even take a whole generation, but you need to put a plan in place with intention and have commitment. Houlihan recently, over the last couple of years, we've paired ourselves with 3 organizations that basically cultivate and support juniors and seniors in high school who are either first generation to go to college or BIPOC or from a socioeconomic background that wouldn't necessarily be attracted to finance or know about finance. and basically support them through the SAT process, the interview process, application process, and all the way through graduating college. It's a program we put in place 2 years ago, I think, officially. It's a 6-year sales cycle, right? That junior has got to get to be a senior to enter our doors, and then from there, we have to work on retaining them with an inclusive environment. But it's a long lead time, and that's not typically how people in finance like to look at it, right? Shorter cycles, higher profit multiple, let's go. So I think that that's one of the important things. The other thing I will say, and this is very important, is the organizations need to stop putting the onus of becoming diverse and inclusive on the already diverse populations from within their own walls. Because they have day jobs, and as passionate as they are about this, it's very taxing. And without the proper allyship, and not just allyship, but engagement from those allies who are not of that diverse background, there will be no momentum, change will be slow, and then we'll get impatient. So all of these things kind of tie together.
David, can I go to you for a second? I want to build a little bit upon what we just said there. So the intentionality is important, but this comes down to there's no overnight change. This takes time. How can organizations maintain the momentum, the buy-in, the support of senior leaders and those across the organization to keep that focus and that intentionality up, knowing that the ROI, the immediate ROI, might not be noticeable? It might be really challenging to see the kind of fruits of your labor, if you will.
Yeah. So it's a big question. So I think it comes down to what you want to achieve in your organization, and what was articulated with like a ton of really good step of like we need to start with data, right? What's our baseline? Where are we today? And typically people try to do baselines with like the number of women in their organization, the number of black people in their organization, so on and so forth. I think there also needs to be a baseline for, do people feel included or not? Are people happy at your organization? Do people want to stay? Would they recommend your organization to other individuals? And so I think it first starts with the baseline, right? Then we need to set an aspiration. Where do you want to be? And so many organizations are like, oh, we're going to do these 17 initiatives because we need to be more diverse and inclusive. What does that even mean in the context of your organization? Do you want to be 10% more black? Do you want to be 50-50 gender-wise? Do you want more queer people in your organization? And so it's setting an intentional aspiration that then you come back to year after year and you say, hey, first year was not great. We didn't hit any of our aspirations at all. And candidly, you probably won't, right? Because this is a test and learn. And what works for PE firm A in Chicago may not work for PE firm B in New York City, even if you're the same size, even if you're recruiting from the same sources, because the people at your organization are what actually makes up your culture. And so I think it's creating a baseline, it's setting an aspiration, testing and learning for that. And I think if you've actually done those things, I don't think like corralling leadership and maintaining towards this journey is actually all that hard. I think where people fail quite miserably is they stop at the baseline. They don't actually articulate what their true, deliberate, intentional aspiration is. And so what they're aiming for is these like random things. And so I think it's all in setting a very true aspiration that you want to get to. And I wouldn't set it too far. It's not a 10-year goal. I would do a 2 to 3 year goal because you can actually see that horizon.
So Tanisha, I want to go to you on this. You work in an organization where this is part of your role. How do you react to what David has said?
I think that's all true. With us, it starts from the very top. So our CEO is committed. He and I work alongside one another to make sure that our executive leadership team is equally as committed. And so it starts with, I think, education on one hand of the data and why it matters, and if it's measured, it'll be managed. That is where it starts. But we have been intentional, to Tanya's point, we've been intentional of where we access our talent. So we don't work in silos in terms of our recruiting. that is a very heavy lift. You have to have a commitment, and you've got to have the right team around you, and you have to develop a strategy that works for your organization. And so for us, we've been intentional to partner with affiliations of different groups. And we've partnered with universities across the board as well as HBCUs to help us attract talent. And we show up at those institutions as well as, different networking events. But my team itself is we've got about 67 HR people. And I can choose any one on the team to help be a representative of the group in which we want to engage. And I don't really say target, and I wouldn't encourage you all to think of it as you're targeting that person. It really is a level of engagement that you have to do. And it's a heavy lift, and that's where the commitment comes in. It's just no different than, any one of us starting to work out. The first, few exercise sessions will we'll feel it in our muscles, it'll be sore. But once you start the repetition and you develop a strategy and a pattern, that is where you'll see it. So for us, it's being intentional about how we attract talent and the commitment from our leadership team to not only support it, but to show up with us as well.
Tanya, I want to come back to you for a minute. I want to go into recruiting. So in speaking in particular to the audience here, for a whether private equity, investment banking, consulting firm, we know, and we were discussing this at lunch, that there tends to be a lack of diversity in most organizations around that. And there also tends to be a lack of resources around that at times to put the emphasis there. Do you have any thoughts on how organizations and firms, especially smaller firms, can be thoughtful in trying to create a kind of a wider aperture and attract a more diverse talent pool?
Yeah, I think we talk about corporate responsibility as it relates to diversity a lot, but I think what happens is we have the conversation and then we all leave the room and we say, well, that's HR's job, and that's for the executive team to figure out, right? And I'm certain some, if not most of you in this room, are leaders of your own companies. I think what we need to invest more in is personal accountability. What can I do to help, right? For example, last year I volunteered to go and do campus recruiting at a university that isn't a target school. It's a SUNY Binghamton, thought it would be a great place. Turns out other parts of the firm are actually recruiting out of there, but for our office it was a move, and that was something I could contribute. And I think that instead of relying on HR to kind of break the system and do things differently that they've been doing for the same way for so long with long-standing relationships, it's what can I do? Is there someone within the organization or outside the organization that is a little bit different than me that I can sponsor or mentor and really help them understand the finance industry and what it means to be in private equity and investment banking? Is there a school that I can go and help recruit from? And I think that it's got to start there, especially for smaller firms, because there is no massive HR department. There is no, CEO to throw a mandate down. It's kind of every man adding to the equation.
So, as we said, we have to set the right metrics, we have to set the right goals, stay focused on it, and it sounds like from attracting talent, this is getting more than just HR involved in that process. Now, we've attracted diverse talent, we have diverse talent, and David, I want to go to you in this. How do we create true inclusivity?
I will answer that question. I did want to pile on, Tanya, to what you said, because I've had a ton of conversations about recruiting over the last couple of months with many of my PE clients. And they're like, oh, David, we're going to go to HBCUs, right? We're going to go to the SUNY CUNY schools. We're going to go to the state universities. We haven't gone to them before. And they're like, we started going there, but we're still not cracking the nut on folks from affinity groups. And I was like, okay, let's dissect it together. And they're like, yeah, they're really smart. They typically always pass the technical test, but it's just the cultural fit. It's not vibing. to every one of these individuals, I give them a homework assignment, and I say, go write me a rubric for what cultural fit is for your organization, and let's talk about it. I haven't gotten a rubric yet. And the reality is cultural fit is like, do I see myself, in most cases, do I see myself in the person across the table? Could I have a beer with this person? Could I go to a sporting event? Not that I would ever go to a sporting event, but can I be social with this individual? And the reality is if that person didn't go to your alma mater, didn't grow up in your city or state, didn't go to the bank or consulting firm that you went to, you probably won't find things that resonates, right? And so I tell all of the people that are either leading recruiting on the DEI council, want more diverse individuals in your organization, rethink how you're currently instituting cultural fit. It probably isn't doing what you think it's doing for your organization.
I love that point, because that's another thing that you can do personally is when you interview and you toss a candidate out for cultural fit or things like that. I mean, check your data, check your own personal data. How are you making that decision-making process? Why is that? There are a lot of candidates not talking about race or gender or anything, but from a socioeconomic background who don't have the generations of friends who have been through the finance industry and who have been talking the talk since they were 10 years old, right? So if someone comes in and shows an ability to think through a problem and understands the technical math of it, but he struggles to find the right word about an LBO or a DCF, like, is that really a reason to let that candidate go? That what that candidate has demonstrated is a willingness to learn completely on their own, which arguably is far more valuable in the long run. And so that's another personal accountability thing that can really help move the needle.
Can we go back to inclusion? I want to say one thing around the cultural fit thing, and I think it's a really important element because I hear that oftentimes, and even in my prior life as an investment banker, that the conversation is always around, we got to find cultural fit, we got to find cultural fit. And to your point, that oftentimes is, I like you, I'm friends with you, I see myself in you, and by definition, I think that lacks diversity in general. So I think that's an important element, but now how does that build into inclusion, right? Because creating an inclusive culture is really where you can create that cultural fit.
Yeah, inclusion's big. When I come to work, are there people that I want to be around, right? Can I share personal stories or feel that I can talk about a family member who got COVID or my partner, or say that I don't like the story about your kids or any of that stuff, right? And what we've seen over the last couple of years because of COVID, people are more burnt out, far more anxious. They feel the need to be on all the time. And unfortunately, people leaders don't really know what to do about that stuff, right? Everyone is burnt out, anxious. And so one of the biggest findings that we've had recently is that a big pillar of inclusion is well-being, right? Are the people leaders in my organization asking how I'm doing, right? Are they checking in on my workload? Are they helping remedy whether or not I can actually get all this stuff done? Is there a sense of work-life balance? And I know many people, when they hear work-life balance, are like, oh, like, no one's gonna work a 9 to 5. But that's not what work-life balance means. Like, is there a sense of me being able to leave my day job and go actually enjoy personal things? So I think inclusion, more recently, what a lot of employees are looking for is a sense of well-being, right? Can I not be burnt out today versus every other day of this year? Do I have to be anxious about being on because of this remote hybrid working model? So I think that's one big component. I think the other one is around, are there people that I look up to in my organization, right? And so how that's articulated now is mentorship and sponsorship. And the way that I like to talk about it is the 3 ships. And to me, you need 3 ships to really hone your people development program. The first ship is apprenticeship. So are there individuals at my organization that teach me the trick of the trade, right? The day-to-day, right? Maybe that's in Excel, maybe that's in PowerPoint. There's mentorship. I can bounce ideas off of you, right? Should I stay at my organization? Should I not stay at my organization? And sponsorship. Sponsorship is, I'm probably not talking to you as much, but you're going to open doors for me. If you see an opportunity that's going to be a career changer, you're going to say, hey, David, I have this really cool thing. Sponsorship is limited because there are limited opportunities, but I think the 3 ships are also critical to inclusion. There are also others, but I want to make sure that I'm giving space as well.
Tanisha?
You've covered it really well.
I agree with everything that's been stated. Mental health is something that is definitely inclusive, and it comes in a couple different forms, at least in my world it does. One is people just being burnt out, just the COVID fatigue, that sort of thing. And then even for us in our world, even during the social unrest, we allowed employees to let us know how they feel. And we asked those questions, and we encouraged and wanted to hear from them, and we asked the how are you doing during that time. And then we even ran a mental health series to show people that, one, there's resources available, but 2, we will also be here to support you. And the feedback that we received was, I'm glad that I'm in this environment at this time. And that's important, you know, and there's levels to inclusion, and that's something that you should keep in mind. It's not a one-trick pony. It is definitely something that has many levels, and you do have to learn how to navigate through them and watch what's happening around you versus putting, you know, your head in the sand if in fact that is a potential option or thing that you may think about. I'll close my ears until it goes away. Facing things head on will allow for people to feel like they are in the right environment. If they see that you address what's actually happening, both internally and externally, and not running from it, you'll gain far greater commitment than you will otherwise, you know, not having said anything at all.
I think that's very fair. So we're going to be opening the floor up for questions in just a few minutes here, but to kind of wind us down, Tanny, I'd like to start with you and work our way down. We said intentionality is really important, and so what are you can call actionable things that people can do or intentional steps people can take to truly start promoting a DE&I initiative within their organizations?
Yeah, I come back to the fact that committees and organizational white papers are great. But I would really encourage everyone in this room to think about the one thing that they can do this year that could change their direct team, right? Whether it is mentoring or sponsoring someone who is already in your organization, mentoring or sponsoring someone who doesn't look at all like you on any dimension, that is somewhere associated in your circle, and kind of bringing them into the industry. You know, defeating your own personal concept of culture and being more open-minded when interviewing. I mean, or, you know, doing something a little more proactive, like actually going on the recruiting roadshow and things like that. I think those are all things that we can all take back to our desks and our offices ourselves.
Great. Tanisha?
I would agree with all of that. The one thing that I always encourage leaders to think about as they start on this journey of being more inclusive and having greater diversity within their organization is to be introspective first. Be introspective and understand and check your own bias. That's where it starts. You can do all these other things, but if you don't take the opportunity to level set for yourself, it becomes difficult. So that is, I mean, at the very, very bare bones minimum, what I would encourage people to do is to think about where you sit on that spectrum and to be introspective. Once you've had that, then I think you can start down the path that Tanya is talking about, being more involved. How do you show up at your recruiting events? How do you encourage people to apply? How do you welcome them in once they are hired? That all matters. And the apprenticeships, the mentors, mentorships, that is extremely important, because if people know that they've got someone supporting them, they're likely again to stay. But all of those things, you know, take place or can occur, but I would, suggest really at the start of it, that's how you get going.
Appreciate that. David?
A couple of things I'll add for what you should be doing, and then I might add a few of what you should not be doing. In terms of should be doing, I agree with everything that was stated. A few that I'll add, lots of organizations today are tracking gender in terms of diversity. They might also be tracking race. You should start tracking at the intersection. So track gender and race. Eventually, we'll have mechanisms to better collect things like sexual orientation and gender identity, but at minimum, you should start collecting at the intersection. Intersectionality in the workplace matters so much. Intersectionality meaning overlapping identities, being Black and being a woman, being Asian and being trans, so on and so forth. I'd add holding senior leaders accountable. We did a study over the last year where we looked at the top DEI performing companies and everyone else. 100% of the top DEI performing companies kept senior leaders accountable by putting DEI as a KPI on their performance management sheet, any of that stuff. The rest of the companies did not outside of that. And so it's really thinking through how are we upholding accountability in our organization. Another one I'll add, which I'm always surprised by when I talk to organizations, over the last 2 years, we've done so much to change from meeting physically to being remote. And we did that, candidly, pretty overnight. We did it pretty quickly. And then I asked, okay, have you updated evaluation criteria? Have you updated promotion criteria given you've gone fully remote? Have you changed anything about how you evaluate your organization or your people? And in almost every organization says no. And so it's really thinking through, given we've changed so much about how we work, let's take a look at the rubrics and the criteria that were candidly created probably 20, 25 years ago that we're still using, we probably haven't updated. And then the last thing I'll say is around policies and programs. Your handbook probably hasn't been updated in a while. I'd take a look at that. I'd take a look at some of the more archaic policies and programs that you have instituted and try thinking about how we spice things up to make things more inclusive. And then for things not to do, that list is really long, but I'll mention 3 things. So many organizations come to me and say, here's the 30 things that we want to do. And they hope that 3 flowers bloom out of all of those. I would be very deliberate with what you want to do in your organization and choose the 3 to 5 things and do those really well. Your employees will very much so appreciate it. Second thing is, don't use training as a solve. I have so many conversations of, but we'll just do an allyship training or an anti-racism training. And I'm like, cool, that's great. Capability building is awesome. You cannot be anti-racist after a 30-minute session. And so think through what that training capability building experience look like, because it probably is a couple of sessions a year and over the course of many years. And then the last thing is DEI is not, it's not a side hustle, right? It is the main show. And so it needs to be integrated into your big meetings, right? It has to be a permanent agenda item, hopefully at the top and not at the bottom. But let's rethink how we integrate this into our organization, because it impacts everything, right? It impacts the well-being of your people. It impacts them wanting to be there. It impacts financial outperformance, which I taught you all earlier today. So rethink how you're prioritizing DEI more broadly.
Thank you. Appreciate that. With that, we'd like to open the floor to any questions.
Oh, wow.
I believe we have a mic going around.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mike. I actually was writing a 3-part series for a blog on ESGs, and I know there's a lot of pushback on them. I know the state of Utah did something. I think some Republicans in Pennsylvania and I think Georgia, I think one other state. What do you do if your company faces headwinds with doing that, or your organization as a whole?
Oh boy. Look, as an organization, you have to decide what's important to you, right? It's a cost-benefit analysis in its simplest form. You are never going to make 100% of the market happy. So first and foremost, be introspective. Second, decide what's your priority. If you look long enough, you will always get confirmation that what you're doing, what you want to do is right. So at the end of the day, I think David's made the economic case for doing it. I think we've made the employment case for it, right? How are you going to get talent if that talent is raised to value this? And then there's just the common sense case, which is a representative workplace serves a representative economy better.
That's well said.
I guess there's one
We've got a
there, or
microphone.
there.
I'm closer, I'll take it. Brian Cummings, thank you very much for your talk today. Can you talk a little bit for us about the challenges of recruiting sort of outside of your identity? And I think of this in the context of white male at an investment bank, which are full of people that look like me. And diversity is very important to me for lots of reasons that I'll be happy to talk about another time. But how, as I think about saying, hey, we should go to HBCUs, hey, we should go to trans or queer organizations on campus, and I'm a straight white male, and it's more authentic if I have a colleague in that community who can go with me and say, no, this is why the firm is great, this is why you want to come, as opposed to me saying, please come join us because we're so deficient in that respect. So obviously it's important for everyone to be welcoming and to make that push. But talk a little bit about that challenge, if you would, because that's one of the things I think a lot of organizations struggle with, is how do we go and be authentic when we're not part of that community?
Lucky for you, that was our lunch conversation. David, do you want to?
Yeah. So one, I think it's important for us to have the Bryans of the world. I don't think that there are enough organizations that do have the Bryans that say this is important. And as I don't know what your identity is, but as whatever you are, I want to bring people that don't look like me or see themselves in me to my organization. So I think first and foremost, we need the Bryans. And that actually does way more than you think in campus communities. When they see someone not like them, say, I want people like you at my organization. So that's one. Second, it's helpful for sure to bring, whether it be the black person or the trans person or the genderqueer person from your organization. I'm guessing in most cases we probably don't have those people at our organizations today. And so I think the conversation then becomes very honest, right? Because let me tell you, these freshmen can read way past you. And it's kind of scary, but like having a very candid conversation of, here's what we've done over the last 5 years to be way more inclusive. We're excited to have a more representative and diverse community at our organization. And here's what we've done. That excites the black person. That excites the trans student. That excites the queer individual at the campus or career fair that you're actually going to go to. So I think it's being a bit more vulnerable, which I know we're not conditioned to be, but it actually goes quite a long way.
And Brian, the one thing that I'll add to that is also in your marketing. So if you have a website, you can put where your commitment is around diversity. If you are visiting an institution or a school or a network of individuals, any sort of recruitment marketing materials that you may have will talk about that commitment. So that will help, and everything that David said is completely spot on. But additionally, because what will happen is that freshmen will check out what you just said. And the best way for them to check that out is to see it maybe on your company's LinkedIn profile that you start to, so Pride Month is coming up, right? So you can talk about that and you can change your logo to, be multicolored or whatever it is, so that when the person's kind of sniffing out, are you who you really said you are, then they're going to be able to see in some way that it's just not hot air. So that's very definitive and that's tangible for the candidate.
And Tanisha, I want to build on this for a second. As a white heterosis male that very much, I relate with what you're saying. You had pointed this out earlier. A lot of this comes down to introspection. It's looking inside, digging in, doing the hard work, and recognizing that at times you're going to see stuff you don't like about yourself that you have to address and face in the mirror and work through. In doing that, that's bringing the authentic version. That's how you can show up, and you may not have that representation today, but you put that work in, you're there for a reason, and you'll be able to build, and to your point, they're gonna see right through it whether you've done that work or not.
And I think that that's a very good point. You know, I would say, Brian, you're going to find people, what you just shared, you're going to find people that will be more attracted to you than running the other way. And you're not going to get it right. We don't get it right. No one ever gets it right 100% of the time. But I think that authenticity and that vulnerability that you shared, and to say, it's not what I want it to be today, but I'm willing to do the work, I can assure you, let me uncross my legs, I can assure you that you will find people that would be willing to help you start that path and continue down that journey. It happens all the time.
One very tactical example that comes to mind is, let's say you went to a LGBTQ plus or trans career fair, and you don't have an openly trans or openly queer individual at your organization. Your articulation of, well, we have trans affirming benefits, we have LGBTQ plus affirming benefits, we have things like surrogacy and ways for you to adopt, and we cover gender affirming surgery. Even without having those individuals in your organization, but the fact that you have those benefits speaks volumes to the fact that you are willing to invest in the future classes that you don't have today, but are excited to recruit.
I would also say, and we're way over time here, but I would also say that showing an interest, like a genuine interest, if you're an investment banker, I think I heard you say you're probably going to career events, you're meeting, you know, in the Zoom era, it's a little bit harder, but in person, you're meeting 40 students, right? If you find a student who represents that dimensionality, who you think is high potential, you know, taking note of their name and then telling your HR person, hey, can we send that person an email and let them know that I'm available for a follow-up conversation? That sort of advocacy resonates, especially, and it comes off as very authentic, because the reality is you don't have the mental capacity, maybe you do, to remember 50 people's names and follow up with each one of them. And then the trick here is when that person reaches out, respond. And that can have a very profound impact.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I wanted to say, you mentioned something earlier. I'm a Latina. You don't see a lot of, we're rare. I'm the CFO of an IT and technology advisory company specializing in PE. I left the private equity space because I felt it was very isolating. It took 22 years to be seen as a person. And this is gonna sound silly, but I appreciate that you're all here, because it means that it's something that's important, right? Whether it's being required by your activist investors or because you want to do something about it. And I was just going to say that you mentioned that you know, you give somebody a shot who's hungry, because a lot of times, I'm from Chicago, one of the most diverse, segregated cities. And what that means is every community sticks to itself, and you really have to give somebody a chance. Let's say, the way I got into where I'm at is that somebody gave a senior accountant a shot, she happened to know me, and here I am, right? But once you get there, it can be one of the most isolating experiences, because that whole cultural fit you mentioned, I mean, everything that was asked of me, English is my second language. I learned it, become a CPA, I became one, and the line keeps getting moved and moved and moved, right? And it doesn't help that I didn't know what mashed potatoes were until I was like in 3rd grade. So they were I thought it was ice cream, and I was in for quite the shock. But anyway, I was going to say that I really do appreciate this, because even now, even though I'm very fortunate to be part of a company that I guess more minorities started applying because they saw me in a position of leadership, I appreciate that my CEO did not view me as a token minority, that he viewed me as a person. And I think it kind of goes back to what you said, because if I'm gonna be somebody's checkbox, I don't want that job.
That's right.
I want to earn the job on my own merit, right? And I think it kind of goes back to, don't look at the traditional target schools. There are people like me that go to non-traditional schools that are very hungry, that are gonna put in those 70, 80, 90, 100 hours that I'm surprised my husband didn't divorce me because I was working that much. So we're out there, and again, as a Latina who still feels kind of isolated in the C-suite because I don't see other women like me, right? And look around. And again, it's nothing against you, but we are out there, and I wanted to say that for what it's worth, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that said, I think we're over time at this point, so we are going to wind out here. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure we can hang out for a few minutes up here in front, but thank you all for attending here.